We hope that this is the worst of it.
I'm trying to die out here. What happened to our fake adventure bike on a real adventure trip? But before that, if you haven't seen it in the last video, we went over all the moto gear, the camping gear, the Haven tent, had a lot of questions on that, so go check out the first video if you haven't seen that. Then come check out this one where we go over everything that went wrong with the bike and fix it. Boom! Let's talk about all the things we broke. And actually one of the first things I want to deal with is the kickstand.
The kickstand is bent. Can you see it? You notice it's kind of more forward than it should be.
We got to do a thing, we got to bend it back, reinforce it, and I'm back here at Chris's house. How?
My thoughts were use this little piece here, cut it in half and kind of segment it in here, weld it all up. Hopefully that will reinforce it so it doesn't do this again. I did this, not Chris. Not as pretty as it was, but it's also straight now and much reinforced.
Should be. Alright, sorry we coded. That's definitely, this is Jake coded. It's also free.
Just drying up now. Thank you, Christopher.
Yeah, brother. Twin Terpskis. Yeah, it looks a little patched up there. We could have grinded that down and cleaned it up, but you know what? It's a story. It's fun. Let's get it on. Now that I've got that fixed, let's start with the front wheel here and kind of work our way up and back. Rim itself from Cognito and powder coated by We Coat It. Definitely has some nicks in it now, which was gonna happen. It's held up fine. These spokes are all, you know, still nice and tight, which is good because they went through quite a bit of abuse. But one of the first issues we did run into as soon as the trip started was this thing losing its bead numerous times. This was really weird because I rode on this bike for probably 500 miles or so before the trip. A lot of it off-roading too, but as soon as we hit the road that morning, the tire kept losing its bead. But the shop that we went to in Paris, Texas, we had aired this thing back up before we put the tube in it, sprayed the whole thing down and couldn't figure out where it was leaking. I've heard of several other people having this problem now who've done the tubeless conversion like I've talked about. Why this is, I don't know for sure. My Supermoto's done this way and has no problems. The rear never had any problems on this bike. I think I'm gonna have a tire machine coming here soon. We'll do a whole video on that thing when it gets here, but we'll pull this tire off and we'll really inspect it and see if we can figure out what the deal is. But for now there's a tube in it and that does work just fine. Let's talk about the forks, and this is where we ran into a little bit of a problem. Actually the suspension was okay, you know, I mean it still only has like 5.1 inches of travel, but it actually held up pretty good. We did get a leak though, and it wasn't where you think it is around, everyone thinks, oh, you're gonna blow your fork seals right out. The problem was between my extension cap up there at the top. That's where I had a failure. Matt has the same extensions on his, had no problems. My left side one had no problem. Just the right one had this leak at the very top. It could be I just don't have the cap tight enough, but we're gonna pull that off right now and we're gonna fix it. I've had a number of y'all ask me if my friend can make these fork spacers for you as well, and the answer to that is no. He's not interested in making any more of these. You gotta understand, if he's running a machine shop, and at the end of the day, these just wouldn't be profitable for him to make. He made these kind of as a one-off for me and Matt. If you want them, my best suggestion to you, find a local machine shop with either do this with a CNC or a lathe. Look at that though. A little bit of dirt right there on the end of the threads, but that's looking good because we kept that nice and greased up. Look at that! I don't think I had this thing tight enough. I should be able to do that. We go and remove all the fluid and refill it back up. I mentioned you never know what got sucked back into it. I mean, if it was pushing stuff out, it might have been pulling stuff back in. The threads on this look just fine to me. The O-ring looks good. There's our spacer, our washer, spring. Oh yeah, definitely still some oil in there or it wouldn't look like that. We'll let that drain down. This thing's pretty well drained out now. So here's what I want to do. Before I stick this thing back together, I want to put this cap back on, tighten this up, then we'll check it. So I've got my soapy water right here, and if it's leaking, well, when we push this down, we should see bubbles. A little bit of this soapy water around it. I've got my concentrated face going here. I think I just didn't have it tight enough, which is a total dingus move on me. I think it's fine. We're not gonna have to do any kind of repair to that. I think it's good, guys. I think we've got it repaired. Let's put it back together. Soon, it's all loaded up right now. Like, they got the astronauts already on it. So now the front end is back on and looking good. Is there anything else to report up here? Let's see. The lighting system was ridiculous from Baja Designs. I didn't plan to be out in the woods in the dark like that. You see from the videos, I had an absurd amount of light. I think the guys actually liked me being somewhat towards the back because I was just project light past everything and just it was awesome. The bigger thing that I'd like to do is switch the front from a 17 to a 19. Cognito, who makes the rims, they do have the option for a 19. Anyways, let's talk about the skid plate. So it definitely took some good wallops there, but not as much as a beating as I think I thought it would, as a lot of people thought it would. And there's a lot of people saying, oh, you're gonna grind into something with this and it's gonna stop you. Like, no, never even once was that a thing. This thing took, like I said, did take some good poundings and it did just fine. One thing I do want to check is the chain slider that we built. This is actually another spare piece that I had, and I traced out the shape, so I had a template for a new one. I can use this to sort of measure, and let's see if we've eaten into this material at all. Let's see, actually it might be kind of difficult. Oh yeah, it's the same. It hasn't moved any. We'll probably cause more chain wear, like, you know, quicken chain wear than anything. I'd love to get a little roller in there if I could, but literally the frame of the bike was in the way. That's held up good. While we're down here, these pegs held up well. I'm on the floor here in a great comfortable position with my knees. I have a motorcycle lift. What am I doing? Let's talk about this rear tire. This was insane. This was like an element of this bike in a way. It's like having a quad tire on the rear. The TKC 80s, nuts out. They were great tires. On the street, it will actually trick you. It's deceiving because it doesn't feel like you're on a knobby. I think you could get yourself into trouble with that. Although I never got into a situation where I felt like I was losing the front or anything, but you'd be going around turns just kind of forgetting. And once you're over about 5 miles an hour, you don't feel the rumbliness of these tires anymore. It just feels like you're on a really good set of street tires. But the grip off-road it just wasn't an issue. Like, we were going through those mud puddles. The amount of grip, it was never even a question. Like, I didn't have to worry about going through anything. My brother's bike, you know, being a DRZ, he had a much narrower tire. He had a TKC 80 on there, but you know, with a narrow tire, it has the ability of just digging in a little bit. And even Chris's bike, you know, being an Africa Twin, it had like, I think it had like a 150, 160 rear. It was a little better, but you know, it's a heavier bike with a smaller back tire. But compared to like an adventure bike, this is pretty light. This is probably 50 pounds or so lighter than an actual Tenere 700 still. I'm pretty sure it is. Having a 180 on the rear with that aggressive of a pattern, it was cool, man. It was really cool. We were just blasting through stuff. So back here on the rear of the bike, I've had a few issues. First of all, you can see a couple spots here where we've lost some paint. Wouldn't be the end of the world. This is aluminum right here. However, our subcage is not aluminum, and we have a couple little spots on here that got wore all the way down to the steel. We had that little fender bag running across here with some tools in it to make it rigid, to give us a platform to put our bag on. And this ultimately just didn't work as well as I thought it was gonna work. The end result to that is that we did have a few areas. There's also a few areas on the frame here that have exposed metal on them, and this frame is steel. So we need to take care of that. That means we need to take this whole seat assembly, all this off, and see what's going on below there. So it's a bit dirty in here, but not near as dirty as I thought it was gonna be. We can try to wipe this up a bit. I think let's try to take this cover off because I also want to pull the air filter out and see how dirty that got. I know my air box had a little bit of moisture get down in there. I can see there's some dirt down in here. So first of all, I'll move that. Hey, that looks pretty good in there. It's a little greasy looking in there, probably just from filter oil and maybe a bit of water splashing up and hitting it. But good news is, yeah, it looks really good inside this box right now. So the filter did its job. Yeah, it's definitely gonna need to clean out. A little hot soapy water, and we'll have to let this thing dry out overnight. These things take a minute to fully dry out. But to help this thing out in the future, I think it would be good if we did a little modification to this, just for any big things of water and mud splashing over into it. There it is, been cleaned up in a EP approved way. Originally when I put these on, they weren't touching the frame at all. They're incredibly close. Now I can see there is a spot where they're making contact, and I want to pull these off. It's just this one little spot that had some rubbing, but I do see a few other small little bits here, and it's pretty dirty in general. See right here, I've gotten off any little light surface rust that would have formed on here and kind of scuffed the rest of this back up where I need to put some paint down. Now when it comes to the powder coating on this piece, it was definitely super thick. You can feel it in here. You do make sprayed paint you can get to repair this. It's gonna look a little funny because you can really just feel, and you can even physically see the indentions of where the powder coat wore down. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put something over it. It's not gonna match perfectly. I'll kind of mask it up so it's like all kind of in an area. I was gonna try to fade it at first, but that's gonna be silly. That way this will be covered. At least it won't rust anymore. It won't look super unusual. At some point we'll send this back and get it properly powder coated. We don't want to leave it just raw in the meantime. So we're gonna paint this. We're gonna paint a couple spots on the frame here. Little hit of paint over the raw steel just to keep it nice and protected. It's the next day and our paint is dry. It's the Rust-Oleum matte black that looks almost exactly like the frame. Think about the alternative. The alternative is you have exposed steel, which is gonna rust. So you have to do something about it. And short of taking the whole thing apart and getting it re-powder coated with a much thicker coat, that's pretty extreme. This is a simple thing you can do. Our sub cage is nice and dried here. And yes, this paint does not really quite match. It doesn't look terrible, but no, it doesn't match perfectly. The 3 bolts they're holding us down have different series of sort of spacers and washers and stuff in there. And the bottom one down here, I had 3. I've pulled one out and that articulates it out just a little bit. And now the gap is a lot better down here at the bottom. And I think that'll fix it. So I'm gonna bolt this back down and see how it looks. Before this was touching and now there's a gap in there. The filter is nice and dried off now. I've bought a big old sheet of this just foam filter material. This is more like what you'd see in a dirt bike, and they sell this in big just sheets like this if you like. Basically want to make a square of it that'll go kind of in there pre-filter before it goes into the main filter. Once this thing is nice and oiled, this type of filter should do a really good job of stopping water, and they actually will. They'll stop a lot of water, as well as just kind of being just a pre-filter to catch some of the big junk so it doesn't just fall down into, you know, the way this thing sits in there, it's like a cup, so everything falls down into it and it can't get back out. And you may be thinking, Jake, isn't this gonna cost you some horsepower? Technically, sure. Am I worried about that? Not particularly. I don't think it's gonna be significant enough to make a noticeable difference. Usually you have different oils that's like, there's ones that work really well for fiber filters, which is what you would call this, and foam filters, but this says it does both. So convenient for me. Put that down, let that sit. Work it in. That's why you wear these gloves. You know what I should have done before I did all this? I should have poked my holes in here. So you want to spin these things backwards so you find their previous threads. There it is. You don't necessarily need everything else in here to be oily. I like that. I got me a little pre-filter here that'll stop things. I can also just come in here and pull the grass and crap that sometimes falls into here. We're basically ready to go on another trip now, minus the little rack that I need to make with my brother. We'll do that here real soon. Otherwise, there's really nothing else major to report on this bike. It actually held up to the trip really, really well. There is one other thing though I have not mentioned yet. You remember that jack-up link we put in the rear of the bike? Well, this is it. So this actually happened right before we left for the trip. We were supposed to leave on Friday. Friday morning, really early. Monday, my brother was over here and we were finishing up his DRZ. Which you would have already seen that video. Then we went for a test ride. That was even in the video too. What you didn't see when we came back is why my bike was suddenly on the lift and our kind of mood sort of changed. There's a field over here with some lots where some houses are going to be in the future, and there's some little elevation changes in between those lots. We're just kind of going up and down those, getting a feel for it, and I'm just really following him. My bike is done at this point, and mind you, I've already off-roaded on this bike a good bit here and there. You know, I've taken it around some of the local trails. I've played around with it. It's definitely been airborne a few times. But what happened was, one of those little hills between the lots, I just sort of throttled off of it. In fact, Ian had looked back at me right as I did it, and he said, Jake, you probably only had like 6 inches of air. The bike went boom, and it did not come back up. I suddenly had a low rider in the rear. Initially, I just thought, oh great, I've blown the shock out. But that was not the case. This whole thing had ripped, and the bolt was just resting on this bit of a nub right here, which was enough to creep it back home so we could figure out what the heck happened with this thing. Obviously a major failure here, and if you actually look at the pictures of this thing how it was before, there was 4 holes in this thing. You had a stock position, 2 lowering positions, and 1 raising position. It's easy now to look at it after the fact and see why it failed, but they build a lot of linkages like this. There's tons of linkages with ability to be adjustable that have tons of holes in it like this. And maybe that works fine in a lowering scenario, but if you're raised up and you're doing silly stuff like I was doing, well, clearly we found the weak link in this. We're supposed to leave in like 4 days, and now my bike is literally broken. I stuck the stock linkage back on there to see if maybe that was gonna be doable. I thought maybe I could drop the forks down a little bit so the bike wasn't riding up real high. However, that was just gonna be too goofy. The kickstand wasn't gonna work at all. I called up Matt, because they were actually leaving that Wednesday, and he had the exact same linkage. He took it over with some aluminum, since his was not broken yet. Chris, Fire Guy, he modified his to basically beefed it up temporarily for the trip. I looked at the time and realized it was about 7:30 a.m. Australia time, and that's where this comes from, by the way, from a place called Extreme Creations. They're the ones that make like a turbo for this bike and the FZO MT-09, and they make a bunch of other really cool stuff. Anyway, I shot them over an email with a handful of pictures of this and said, guys, we have a bit of a problem. About an hour later, I got a response going, oh my god, that's terrible, we need to fix this. About another hour and a half later, I get an email with a picture of this. And remember, they actually have their own CNC machine there, they have these CAD files. So the cool thing is, they looked at it, they realized there was a problem, and they stopped everything they were doing and went about fixing it. They quickly designed a completely new one. They eliminated the stock position hole because that was just redundant. There's more material around all of the holes now, plus the entire thing is something like 40% thicker. And they said, yeah, we're gonna send you one as well as everybody else who bought one of these. I got another message from Matt. Like I said, he had bought one of these too. He said, hey, I just got a message about a new one of these coming. So they're on it. They had this thing in the mail before lunch that day. However, it was showing that it was not going to show up until Monday. At least I'll be able to fix my bike, but it won't be before this trip. Come Friday, I get a message from DHL, a text message saying, hey, you got a part showing up today from Australia. Part showed up, of course, it was like one of the last stops, but it's still impressive that it showed up. But I slapped the new one in, it's down in there, it's hard to see now, but it's held up just fine. If anything, I'll just say a huge shout out to Extreme Creations. You know, sometimes things go wrong, and what really shows me, you know, the quality of a company is how they handle those situations. That's a company that's earned my business. Awesome work by Extreme Creations. This is gnarly. Companies out there want to find the weak links in your products, send them to me. I could be your consumer product tester guy. It's looking good. We'll get that rack on it. Got a GPS we're gonna be throwing on it. A couple other little quick things. We're gonna get back out there because I want to go on another trip soon. I do think that was something that maybe didn't come across as well in the videos. We were talking about this a bit with my Patrons, and they said, you know, Jake, it didn't look like you had that great of a time. It just looked like a struggle. I know it came across that way on the film, and a lot of it had to do with some audio issues and some other stuff. I really did have a good time. But go ahead and comment below. Let me know what you think about this project and how well it held up. I want to know what your opinion is on this thing. Did you expect this thing to fall apart? Be honest, because I know some of you really did. Otherwise, thanks for watching. I want to go ride this thing so bad now, but I got to go eat dinner. The wife just told me. It's also my 14-year marriage anniversary to my wife, so I should probably go in there.